Welcome to the Up Arrow Podcast with William Harris, featuring top business leaders sharing strategies and resources to get to the next level. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everybody, William Harris here. I'm the founder and CEO of Element and the host of this podcast where I'm interviewing the brightest minds in e-commerce to help you scale from 10 million to 100 million and beyond. I'm really excited about the guest that I have here today, Adam Butt. He is the prime example of living the American dream, transitioning from humble beginnings in Liverpool, England to the US in 2009. He transformed his journey from boxing to launching Noticed.com in 2015 with just $500. As CEO and a serial investor, he believes in the power of reciprocation and giving back. Today, Adam's 50-plus team is scaling 10 million to 100 million GMV giants like Liquid Death, Rare Beauty, and Beauty Blender. Noticed operates as a global e-commerce agency that delivers strategy, design, data, tech, and marketing converge. And I've worked with you on a lot of these things, so it's fun to finally be able to talk to you in the podcast format.
Yeah, it's great to see you in the flesh, Will, as they say in the remote world, but really looking forward to chatting today and hashing it out.
Yeah, I was trying to think about who introduced us, and if I remember correctly, we just connected on LinkedIn. I think that you even sent me a direct message on LinkedIn and we connected to just chat through some of the things that we were seeing in the D2C space, right?
Yeah. I think it was LinkedIn. I think it was like 3-4 years ago. I think it was around there. So time goes fly when you're busy, right?
It does. And it's just fun to see how you can go from just meeting somebody online to connecting and working with them and building things together. So that's really fun. Before I get into the crazy stuff here, I want to at least announce our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Element. Element is an award-winning advertising agency optimizing e-commerce campaigns around profit. In fact, we've helped 13 of our customers get acquired, with the largest one selling for nearly 800 million. And we were ranked as the 12th fastest growing agency in the world by Adweek. You can learn more on our website at element.com, which is spelled ELUMYNT.com. That said, on to the exciting stuff. Tell me about the backstory of Noticed. You hinted at this a little bit. Came here, $500. You start Noticed.com. Why did you start it in the first place? Why was this what you decided this is what we need to do? And tell me about how you kind of ended up being where you're at now with over 50 employees.
Yeah. So I ended up, what really started for me was I was working at an ad tech company called Thomasnet. They were basically a segment of Google. They were a B2B search engine that connected industrial B2B buyers and sellers together. So I was actually doing a junior client success role there. I was project managing. I was also selling. And, I sold informational websites, SEO, PPC. I was about 24, just kind of trying to figure out life. I was working in a cubicle, the old cubicles that don't exist today, but they kind of exist. So that was kind of really my first exposure to digital, I would say. And, I was there for a while and just really had some good success. And one of my friends, he lived in the United Kingdom and he was working at a website design company. And, we were chatting on Skype at the time, but what Skype was like, it was, that was the thing. So I'm probably getting a bit old school, yeah. But we were chatting and, he was telling me how his company was growing and what they were doing. I was like, he just said to me, you should do this. Like you've got the tech side that you've also got the sales side. And I was okay at sales. And they were selling on Elance at the time. I don't know if you remember Elance.com. It was a former Upwork. So I ended up jumping on there and had some success. And that was kind of my first real stint. I started for the next 2-3 years as freelancing from my apartment, building informational sites, Drupal, WordPress, .NET Nuke for anyone who knows that. Dealing with, servers, the cloud proxy. And then around 2013, I got my first Magento client. She was it was basically a Western women's apparel business, but $100 million market cap the industry was. And she sold ponchos, cowgirl hats, cowgirl boots. And it's a really interesting industry. One fun fact was their largest customer every year used to spend about $40,000 on clothes. So I still don't remember their name, but I remember how much they used to spend. So it was a unique business. And, she basically gave me the full trust to rebrand, re-platform on Magento at the time, and take on all their FB, AdWords, SEO. And at the time, they were doing about 450 grand, 10-year business, only selling on eBay, a few on the site. And this business basically went from 450 grand to 1.8 million in 12 months. That was kind of my first real exposure to e-commerce. I kind of just got the bug. And like everyone, I just started to kind of explore more of that. And right around 2015, I decided that I wanted to fully go into e-commerce. That's kind of where my passion kind of landed with it. Just seeing the actual results that were clear, you could see a clear metric behind it. So, Lotus was born in 2015 as an e-commerce and marketing agency, and it kind of all started from there in my little apartment in Hatfield, PA.
That's incredible. Just like you said, living the American dream and being able to come from Elance to, what you've done today. I feel like that's something that a lot of people aspire to. But to be fair, when you started doing this, it's not like you envisioned probably that one day this would be a 50-person company, right? Like that wasn't your initial goal. Hey, I'm going to go out and start this really big agency.
Yeah, I think most people, when they start out, they want to grow. But then once you start to get past those first few years, you start to realize how much it's going to take to actually grow. I think that's where the real hard work begins, because when you're starting out, you're getting a few clients here and there, you're living off of the profits that are coming in. But then when you actually start to hire a team, that's where the real responsibility comes, and that's where you really get tested. So for me, I think looking back at it, I think getting past that stage of understanding things I didn't know, like basic P&Ls, basic financial statements, understand how to forecast, that was a huge part of the learning curve that I think most companies have to go through. When I got past like that first few years of understanding, like, okay, I'm comfortable personally, the part that for me is something I think happens to a lot of agencies, and I think it's a theme in this industry specifically, is when you realize how hard it is to scale a digital business. You're looking at a computer all day, in most cases back then, because you're kind of doing everything. You kind of get into a point of, do you want to be a lifestyle business, or do you actually want to be a business where it doesn't depend on you? And I think that's a really difficult choice a lot of agencies get into. It's probably third, fourth year into the business, maybe for some people. That's what it was for me. But that's where really you've got to know who you are, and you either want to stay in, grow it into a lifestyle company over the next few decades, or you actually want to grow it and build a viable business that's not going to depend solely on you. And that for me was, I think, a decision I made purely for my kids, because I realized if I was going to be the only one that the business depended on, I wouldn't be able to do the things I need to do with my kids. And I think a lot of that comes around mindset of you're either playing the short game or you're playing the long game. How do you want to go about it? And for me, I was looking to follow the long game. That was kind of where my mindset was set on growing a business.
Yeah, I like that. So transitioning into something that you and I were talking about before, when it comes to other brands. So, one of the things we're talking about and that you and I both focus on is helping brands, e-commerce, D2C brands, grow from 10 million to 100 million and beyond. We were talking about just some of the macro fundamentals that these brands aren't understanding and what a 360 omnichannel really looks like. Take me through your plan on what this looks like.
So for me, when I look back at when I kind of started the whole journey in digital, when you start and you kind of try to understand the life cycle of what it truly takes to launch a digital brand, whether it's informational or transactional. But what I've found is most agencies are not stepping back and like looking at the entire picture. They're looking at, okay, I know this is a problem, but I can't fix the problem. And what I mean by that is, for me, I've built like an 8-pillar system that is what we're trying to work towards as a company over the next coming years, I noticed. But I think one of the biggest things that a lot of brands who are trying to compete with the current emerging brands of today is what actually is fundamentally wrong in their whole digital activation, transformation process, what are they missing? And I think the part for me is it all starts at like the process, from it's outside of product. Once the product they've got figured out, you've got brand, you've got your GTM, you've got your content, you've got your experience, you've got your acquisition, you've got your data layer, you've got your conversion. I think if someone truly understands that, I think that's the part that brands are still not understanding, is when you don't have all that in place fully. That is why a lot of the DTC brands today are winning against the traditional B2C brands. They just don't get it. And I think there's a lot of rewiring in knowledge of some of these traditional B2C brands that have historically kind of just pigeonholed and tried to get everything activated in certain ways. I think it's a completely 360 closed loop system of how you need to look at it. You need to look at every single foundational element of how you're managing a D2C brand. And I think that's something I've got really, I would say, kind of focused on, is what makes a brand scale versus a brand that's not scaling the same level.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you've seen? You've got 8 pillars here. What are some of the pillars that, if this isn't done right, you can almost guarantee that they're just dead in the water?
For me, the most common one I typically see, and it's like it completely affects every other component of how that brand is getting managed, whether it's a site experience, whether it's acquisition marketing, whether it's retention. It's typically on the brand and creative. Is a lot of the issues I hear from ad agencies is that the client hasn't got strong branding. They haven't got good digital assets. They can't support that on the actual acquisition side. So there's a CAC issue there. There's a CR issue there. And like that one-to-one connection, some brands just don't see it. They don't want to make that a whole investment into changing their messaging, changing their brand, changing their content, whatever it is. That's typically a theme I see. Brand disconnection from the acquisition side and retention. Or it'll be a flip. It'll be they have a strong brand, they have a terrible site experience. And I think the key part here is when I look at this, I look at it in patterns. There's a pattern to how you try to get that jigsaw piece to be made. And I think what is the key part there is that you've got to make sure that either you find really good segmented specialized agencies that truly do each one of those well, to really ensure that you've got a strong brand cohesively if you're a larger brand that have the budget to do that. Or you have to bring a full lifecycle agency that can do all of that really well and be able to scale you purely based on efficiency, purely based on consolidation of everything being in one place. Or you have to find the right agency out there. And I think that's the problem, is there's not a lot of those full lifecycle agencies that are truly doing all that well. I think it's not. I think the model's broke today. I think it is broke.
In what way is it broken?
These are good questions. It's a long-winded question. I think the part of it that's broken is that we've been on, like we're in 2023 now, we're in 2013, and we're 10 years behind where we are. 8 years ago, a lot of the playbook was not really defined for D2C. It was getting figured out. You had older traditional school agencies that were kind of generalist website design companies, generalist marketing companies. Social was really at the mid stage of kind of emerging and going through its boom at that point. I think part of what happened with that is there was this huge transition into new tech agencies who had adopted new tech platforms. And what that ended up doing is taking this traditional market that was very widely focused in everything and segmenting that down into really specialized agencies that really exist today in the current Shopify ecosystem, as we know. The problem is, I feel, is that the segmentation approach has worked for 8 years, but I think the new change that's coming with D2C brands and how they need to compete in the market, with CAC being high, iOS issues, all these things that are happening, I feel that the segmented approach is actually going to hurt them going into the next generation of D2C. I think that ultimately, in order for a brand to scale, they need to do it as efficiently as possible. And I think it's going to get more competitive around time and speed to market. And I think the only way to do that is to really have one all-in solution that can do all those pieces quickly. because it's not as easy as it was 8 years ago. You just throw $1,000 ad budget at Facebook and you would get conversions. It's just not the same. So I think it's going to be more about speed and consolidation for brands. And I think that's probably the real problem with agencies today. There's not a lot of them that are doing it well. So,
yeah. And to be fair, it's hard to do all of that well. Your focus can get very distracted. Let's say that you're predominantly focused on the acquisition side of things, then you tend to focus a little bit less on the LTV side of things. This is just a natural consequence, right? If you're somebody who focuses significantly on LTV, then there's oftentimes it pulls away some of your focus on acquisition. If you are focused on growth and whatever, then maybe you're somebody who's not as focused on merchandising. And so, there's all of these different strings, and you pull one and it pulls the other one shorter. I think that's where the allure of specialized agencies came from, and just specialties in general. Is it possible for an agency to truly do all of that well, or is there always going to be some type of a service within an agency that's the for lack of a better term, the redheaded stepchild of that agency, where it doesn't get as much focus and attention, and it's the "do you want fries with this" kind of approach?
Yeah. I think to go off of that, Will, is for me, I think the traditional problem with agencies who've tried to expand in other different verticals in digital is they typically went with the mindset of, we're going to go and acquire a majority of this agency. And the problem is when you acquire the majority of that agency, most of the time, the owner's already halfway out the door. I think that's the issue, is the internal core of that service really dissipates from there and really doesn't deliver at the level it did before. And I think that model is broken. Large majority agency acquisitions to bring another agency in to fulfill that need for their customer base, I feel it is the wrong approach. I think the approach that has been there for a long time, and I think it's always looking back at time of what things have been figured out before our time that we're figuring out today. It's probably similarly the same, but just different worlds we live in. I think as a good example is Apple's startup approach. Steve Jobs, I'll quote this, I might completely destroy the quote, but he said that Apple does not operate like a corporate company. Apple operates like a startup. Every single department that is doing a product in Apple has its own visionary, and they're responsible for innovating and driving that department forward to keep it at the forefront. I think if you flip that and you look at Dell or Microsoft, very top flat approaches to how they run their business. And I think that is the key part here, is companies who have already defined the model of what's successful and what keeps you at the forefront, and companies that haven't. And I think that is the problem with agencies, is the mindset of how they want to grow is completely wrong. And I think it's wrong because they're thinking about growth similarly to what we're seeing in D2C, raising money, just grow. But then they're sacrificing something, which is the quality of the service, which is the people. And I think that's the problem.
Yeah. So I want to bring this back to, let's say I'm running a $10 million D2C e-commerce brand. And how does this impact them? And one of the things that you've talked to me before is this idea of following the customer's life cycle from online to offline. And we've even talked about how, some of the interesting things that Tesla did with some of this. But when I think about this, I think about there's a lot of brands that have their wholesale division, they have their e-commerce division, and it feels like oftentimes there's a big disconnect between the two. There's a completely separate budgets, disconnect in conversations, disconnect in inventory. And while I can understand the need for that, and this is again where we're getting into this idea of segmentation, where it's like one person that's focused on this, the reality is your customer is not segmented that way. Your customer is flowing from online to offline to online to offline and back again. And so when your tactics and your teams and your goals are segmented, then maybe you're being less efficient. Am I understanding that's maybe kind of where you're getting at with this?
Yeah, it's definitely where I'm going with it. I look at things in a really deep way when it comes to stuff I get obsessed with. I'm a bit of
I love
I'm
it.
a bit of a crazy person when it comes to that. I get really deep in it. And I think when I've looked at the life cycle of, even for an agency, when they're bringing a customer through the process, there's a life cycle. I think truly if a brand wants to be at the forefront of where digital and D2C is going to be going forward, I think they've got to fundamentally understand the buying life cycle of a customer. And I think that's the problem, is a lot of them don't take that step back. They typically grow out of, a mistake or an idea. And then they get to a point where they start to build an internal digital team, and they don't really take a step back and say, okay, where does my customer go and what is the life cycle of how that process should work? And I think that is the root problem, is again, it's that pigeonhole mindset. We get into this focus of need to go for this agency and this, but it's a really entire 360 outlook of how you want to look at your business going forward. And I think, for me, I'll use an example of how I would kind of translate that into another business. I was recently, I'll use Lego or Emirates, for example. So I recently flew on Emirates, and if you go through Emirates' buying life cycle and I watch every step I'm going through, I'm looking at how they are monetizing me as a business and how are they actually driving value in every single step of where I'm actually going from check-in all the way to checkout. And something that hit me when I was actually going through that process is when you go to, for example, Dubai Airport, I had 10 bags. I've got 3 kids, Will, so it's a lot of bags. And I got there and I was like, crap, this is too many bags. And I had an Emirates carrier come over to me, and he had a massive trolley. And I was like, interesting. They figured out that there's monetization from their existing customers. I went straight to the front desk. And at that point, I didn't even have to get my card out because it was already on file. They just charged my card for the person taking it over. If I then go through the entire process, they've got another step where right before you enter the security check-in, they've got a kid's stroller section where you can rent a stroller for a few dollars. And there's just so many ways they're looking to drive value and remember that the customer is going to remember how that experience was from these little incremental bite-sized pieces of value they're adding. And I think that is how a brand needs to think, whether you're digital or whether you're offline. If you can understand where that customer is going in each step of your journey, that's how you're going to really drive that top line, bottom line growth. I think that's ultimately the problem, where brands are not really zooming out to look in. I think that's something I'm really, as you can see, obsessive about.
Yeah. And so you work with some of these brands. You work with some of these biggest brands that are out there. What are things that you see that they're doing well right now? Let's just say you could call out one specifically, or just in general, that the D2C space is doing well at capturing this full life cycle. And then what are some ways that they're doing very poorly? Where are some areas that are really missing this?
So I think you all know Liquid Death, but Liquid Death is one of our clients. They've been working with us for about 3 years now. Amazing clients. And I would say how I would describe them is they're future thinkers. That's all they are. They think differently than most brands. The one thing that I always find funny when I speak to people who are like talking about Liquid Death is like, I don't get it. I actually didn't personally get it when I tried it. I was like trying it, Will, and I was like, I don't get it. But then when I started to dig deeper, I actually understood that they've got a problem in the market that most people don't understand what they're fixing. So they're a canned soda water. I will repeat that again. They're a canned soda water capitals. They are targeting a customer who is not a water drinker, but is a soda drinker, but they want to get them to drink water. And I'm sorry I have to explain it that way, but most people don't get it. So think about your construction workers. Think about drivers, any type of person that's normally drinking high energy drinks, whatever the ICP is. They're trying to go after that customer. And the part for me, which when it comes to looking at them versus a traditional brand, we actually just spoke to a really large B2C and B2B beverage brand doing about $3 billion a year. And they've been around for decades. And the part for me that was very evident when I went through their process and went through Liquid Deaths is they are a completely different wavelengths. When I was speaking to this other beverage brand, what I was learning is that their mindset was still stuck in B2B. they didn't quite understand or grasp that they're losing market share online, even though their purchases are not on the volume side, D2C. It's a brand channel. It's an awareness channel. It's a way for people to try your product. And I think that's the part that Liquid Death get. You've probably seen the Super Bowl ads, Will. You've seen, the crazy type of videos that they've put out there, which they've just recently done one.
Hilarious.
Yeah, they're funny. But their objective is once they get that audience to watch their video and then they build this social media content, which is funny in itself, they just want the customer to go to the site, buy it through Amazon, which is speed, and they ultimately want to get that customer to try it as fast as they can. And they know as soon as that customer goes into Target or Whole Foods or wherever it is and they see that same drink, the likely chance that they're going to pick that up again is 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 times more likely. And that's all their objective is. And that's why these traditional brands are losing market share. They don't understand that the customer is actually here and it's not out there. And I think here it is, my phone, by the way, everyone, my hand. So.
Well, and I think that you bring up a really good point of something we talked about a lot in SaaS. And so I have a background in SaaS before I got into D2C. And we would always talk about getting them to the wow as quickly as possible. So you're onboarding onto a new app. If they onboard to the app, they set up their trial, and then they don't find that wow factor that first time that they're logged in within, ideally the first couple of seconds, minutes, something that makes them go, oh, I get this. And I can see why this really is exciting and matters to me. If they log out, they're not coming back. That's just the reality. Like, I don't remember what the numbers are, but let's just say 90%. It's a pretty significant amount of people that they're not going to come back and finish that trial. They're not going to actually, fully onboard their data or whatever that is. And it's the same thing then for, like you said, D2C brands who maybe are actually saying, we get a lot of our sales from the B2B side. We're getting our sales, in supermarkets or wherever they're selling this at. They're selling it in Target or whatever. But they're trying to get somebody to say, yeah, I saw the commercial. I liked the commercial. I ordered it immediately right there while I was on the couch with my phone so that I could get it, say, wow, I really do like this. Now when I see it, I'm sold. Otherwise, somebody sees the commercial, the Super Bowl commercial, and it's hilarious and it's funny and it did great for branding, but they didn't capture that sale then. That person might not see that for 2 weeks before they go back and they happen to see that as they're strolling through a store or something like that. And they've lost a significant amount of those sales then. Is that kind of what you're saying here?
Yeah, in so many, yeah. I think it's a shift in how most brands are going to be thinking, of course. I think to go off of that, Will, I think the one issue is most brands try and tackle that new approach. If it's a traditional brand who's trying to compete with brand that's coming after their market share, they're trying to tackle it with a kind of a leveled up approach, but they're not going fully in. And I think it's more about the concern of they don't know what they don't know. Mm-hmm. So they kind of level up, but they're not completely committing to the actual full transformation they need to go to. And I think a lot of that is a complete, again, comes to that 8-pillar system. A lot of those brands that are behind still and are losing that micro market share, they need to completely transform their business. They will never be able to completely compete with those brands. And that's a lot for a brand who've been around for a long time. There's a lot of history there, probably from the sort of generational family business. That's a very personal thing for these brands. I've found that they don't really want to make the full shift to. So it's going to be interesting to see where they are, whether they acquire some of these new brands coming up to protect their market share. But with some of these competitors coming up now, I think a lot of them have got a bit of a Phil McKnight ambition. They want to be the leaders in their market. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Well, and so that's one area that D2C is coming in and crushing the status quo. But you and I have also talked, especially this year, where a lot of D2C brands have suffered too. There was a lot of focus on this short-term vision of growth, and they've run into cash flow issues or whatever this was here as well right now. And so they're struggling. What are the areas that you think D2C brands are missing to help them also level up to truly not just carve out, a small percentage market share within a very, very big industry, but to start becoming the dominant player in their industry?
Yeah. So I know we've seen it, we've been chatting about it for a while, Will, but there's been a lot of brands that are struggling financially. They raise money, weren't able to hit their requirements with their investors. So there's a lot of that happening. I think it's tough because, you've always got yin and yang in every relationship. You've got someone who's going to go really hard and got someone who's going to kind of slowly get to that goal. And I think the part that's a huge problem there that I am seeing the pattern is with a lot of these brands that have raised money, they purely raise because they're trying to scale, but they're really not trying to build a brand. And I think a brand, what does a brand mean? A brand means you're building an attachment from a consumer. It means you're building a community of people that actually want to follow you, and you're not just buying, basically fake conversions. These are customers who just tried the product and are not going to come back again, but you're not really truly building a loyal fan base that are connecting with what the brand is. And I think a lot of brands who've raised, they're starting to realize that authenticity needs to be there, and you can't just scale purely through raising money, because at the end of the day, when you come into economies like we have the last 3 years, we've gone through a pretty rough 3 years as an economy. You're going to get found out in that, a lot of brands are going to get found out in that situation where, okay, when the economies are going down, have you really got a viable business model, and where did you go wrong here? And I think that's why a lot of the brands who have scaled purely organically, purely focused on connecting with a consumer at liquid death, those brands are actually thriving in the economy today because they've got a fan base that are going to come back to them every single day, every single week, and they will, because of what they built, how they built it, the timeline they built it. And I think that's the difference of going at speed versus kind of just embracing the journey and making sure you're building that authenticity with your consumer base. I think that's the true issue that I'm seeing in a market like today.
And that works really well for, let's say, a beverage company. To be completely honest, they're not the first beverage company to just have, raving loyal fans. And so I think that there's something that's inherent to that niche. But what about other verticals as well? Let's say, for a while we saw this with mattresses. The mattresses were the thing in D2C, and everybody had a new, mattress company, it felt like. That worked for a little bit as well. But what about other things like toilet paper? Can you build a raving loyal fan base for D2C toilet paper? Is that or are there just limitations to, what can be done there?
Well, there's dude wipes, right? I think that kind of classifies as toilet paper, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
Toilet paper was going to be a tough one, so I had to kind of improvise on that. But
tried to stump him. He got me.
I do think you can build a toilet paper brand, even if it's a different type of brand. I think what it really comes down to is when you look at most of these companies, and again, I don't want to get too focused on any industry, but if you look at toilet paper, Dude Wipes, for example, I'm just going to use them. Dude Wipes basically disrupted the toilet paper industry in a very small, bite-sized way, but they're doing pretty big in what they're doing. And I think that is the unique part about business exploration, is there's so many opportunities out there of finding a problem in the market. And I think that's what a brand needs to focus on is this a problem that we want to solve? And do we have a problem to solve that problem? And I think a lot of brands, again, who don't have the authenticity of who they are and what they're doing and why they're doing it, that is why that brand will either scale through money or it will scale naturally, organically. And I think once brands understand that it's more around that more than anything, I think that's where most of the actual long-term value of where D2C is going. I think D2C is everyone's talked about, everyone talks about, community with the brand loyalty, membership-based programs are coming now, all of these different aspects of what a brand is trying to understand when it comes to RPR, LTV, they're focusing on it now, some of these new brands, but I think there's still a lot of gaps to kind of fill with some of these brands who are still not getting it.
Yeah. There's so much more that I would want to unpack in here. And, if you're also craving more here, you just got to go follow Adam and look at more of what he's saying on LinkedIn and stuff. I want to get into a little bit about who is Adam Butt here as well. What made you this way? What made you the type of person who looks at things, looks at problems this way? Something in your childhood, like what was your childhood like that kind of brought you here?
Well, I'm from Liverpool, so if anyone has been to Liverpool, you know what that city's like. So I'm half Irish, half Scottish. That's kind of where our centres are. We don't call ourselves from Liverpool because that's kind of where we're from. I had a Pakistani father and a British mom. So for me, we didn't have money growing up. We struggled. It was definitely a tough upbringing. I think the biggest part that was challenging was just really the environment. Both in home and outside the home, it was not really the best of areas for someone to really come up and be able to persevere through their adulthood and really get to that point. So I kind of learned to embrace that. I'd say as a kid, I was very hyperactive, couldn't sit still. I was always onto new things. I learned piano at like 8 years old. I played so many different sports. I was really into history and patterns and how different cultures worked. I was into a lot of different things. I didn't really get into tech until around 14, 15. And for me, I think the biggest part that really defined me when I was young is I went through a really rough time of being bullied in school. I got bullied a lot in school, so that was a huge thing. And when I was 17, I finally decided, you know what, I'm gonna focus on me. It's not about anyone else. And I ended up really just reinventing who I was at that time. I went and boxed. I boxed at the #1 boxing gym in the United Kingdom, the Rotunda. It's brought a lot of well-known world champions today. A few people, if you're into boxing, I've boxed with quite a few of them. And I started fighting at 18. So I used to fight in the ring, and that was kind of my outlet and kind of a big part of me kind of overcoming my background and all of the issues I went through. And at the age of 21, I decided to finally make a move to the US and really come here. And I love the culture, I love the people. It was just a very different environment. For me, I would say what's really brought me to where I am today is, I think a defining moment for me was understanding that like your past doesn't define your future. So where you're from, where your upbringing is, I had to embrace that. Coming from nothing, we didn't own a home, and we struggled with money, as I mentioned. So for me, I realized that there was no one coming for me. I had to just figure it out. I came here with nothing, and today, it's been a journey where we are today and where I've come from. But I think the part for me that I took away from that experience of coming here at 21, I'm now 36 this December, so I'm getting on a bit, is that you can really come to a country like America and you can really make things happen. I think some people are saying the American dream's not here. I think it is. I think if you come to a place like America, you can really make things happen. And I just embraced it. I took it with two hands. I've had struggles with the business along the years. I was 40 grand in debt. I had no car. I was living on $400 a week at the time with my wife, maxed out credit cards. And, I had to go from nothing, no one to lean on, to getting the business to a point where I could actually pay myself a paycheck and eventually hire people and give them the chance to move their lives forward. So I've just embraced the journey. That's all I've done.
I love it. I thank you for sharing all of that. I can relate to so much of what you said there too, and so much that I can't relate to as well. But I really appreciate even just that idea of no one's coming to bail you out. No one's coming to help you necessarily in this. Not to say that people aren't helpful and helping in that, but it's like if you fail in this, it's not like somebody's going to rush in and save the day. And I know that that's a driving, motivating factor for me as well, where it's like I have to make this thing successful. I have to push through. And there are times where it's like I have to work until 3 a.m. or whatever that might be. because there isn't necessarily like a safety net, right? And so I can definitely appreciate that and that passion and that drive.
For sure. It's I have learned along the way that we all think differently. Our brains think differently, and the one thing I would just say before we end this, Will, is I'm a big advocate for neurodiversity. It's something I noticed in who we are. We're a very inclusive company. We talk about a wide range of topics. We bring different speakers in to talk about things that people would never learn about. To give everyone a quick heads up, my son's got high functional autism. And I actually found out through my son, which is something I'm very proud of, that I have high functional autism. About 2 years ago, I discovered that. So I think
Wow.
if you don't embrace neurodiversity in your organization, or you don't know anything about it, I would highly recommend to really look at that as a part of your organization, because there's people in your organization that have different brains, they think differently. And I think the more awareness we have around that, it's just really going to drive that education and understanding that not everyone thinks the same, and that's okay. So I'm a huge advocate for that and wanted to push that out there. So thanks a lot for having me on, Will. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate that as well, because neurodiversity is something that is important, something that's getting talked about a lot more. I am diagnosed with ADHD as well. You mentioned being somebody who couldn't sit still as a kid, and I can completely relate to that as well. And I do think that that's, while there's, let's say it's called a disorder as well, get the air quotes in there. I think that it's also a gift. And I think that that's true for a lot of other neurodivergent ways of thinking as well, that there are things that may not necessarily be as much of a disorder as well as a gift in many other ways as well.
Yeah. I've said similar words, so you're taking the words out of my mouth. I think it is a gift. We wouldn't be the way that we are today. And I would say to anyone out there, just embrace it. That's something I've done. And I share stuff on LinkedIn about how I manage it, my routine, stuff like that. So really appreciate it.
Yeah. And so if people wanted to follow you, connect with you, work with you, what is the best way for them to get in touch or stay in touch or follow?
So I'm on LinkedIn, everyone. Adam Butt, last name Butt, so you can't forget it. I'm also on Instagram. If you're on Instagram, you'll probably see me posting videos of me kicking the crap out of a punch bag. So that's probably what you'll notice, or a picture of my daughter, or a video, a funny one. So feel free to check me on Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn. I post a lot about business, growing an agency, personal development, self-development, etc. So follow me if you find me.
Awesome. Adam, thank you again for coming out, sharing your time and your wisdom with us.
Thanks a lot, bro. Appreciate you having me.
Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.